Hey, welcome back to the Southern Catholic. I'm Jesse Jones, and thank you for joining me. Did the Catholic Church add 7 books to the Old Testament canon at the Council of Trent in the 16th century in order to promote some of her teachings that Protestants disagreed with, or to support those teachings, I should say? In the short, the answer is no. But why would anyone make this claim? Some Protestants have fallen victim to a 19th century misconception. I say it's a 19th century misconception because scholarship since that time has disproven this theory. But the theory is this: that there were 2 canons at the time Jesus Christ walked the earth, one being the Palestinian canon and the other being the Alexandrian canon. The Palestinian canon, proponents of this view claim, would essentially be the Tanakh, which is the rabbinical canon of rabbinical Judaism today, and the Protestant Old Testament. Okay? So the 24 books of the Tanakh and the 39 books of the Protestant Bible, or the Old Testament, are essentially the same, right? It's the division, the way the division occurs. So you get 39 in the Protestant Old Testament canon, and you get 24 in the Tanakh. And by the way, I should add that the 39 books in the Protestant Old Testament are referred to as the proto-canonical books, and they are in everyone's Old Testament. They're called proto-canonical because they were recognized as being canonical first before the deuterocanonical books, which is what the debate is over, right? The 7 books that are in the Catholic Bible that Catholics have that Protestants don't have, which is Tobit, Judith, Wisdom of Solomon, Ecclesiasticus, Baruch, and 1st and 2nd Maccabees, with some additions to Daniel and Esther. So those are the deuterocanonical books, and they're called deuterocanonical because they were accepted later universally as being canonical, but they were accepted as being canonical by the church. So the Palestinian canon would be those proto-canonical books. And then there was the Alexandrian canon, which is would be the Septuagint, which contains both the deuterocanonical and the proto-canonical books. It's the Septuagint because it was translated it's a translation of the Hebrew text into Greek, and it was done during the 3rd century BC. And it was said to be done by 72 translators, 6 from each tribe of Israel. So you would get 72. So it's called the Septuagint, and it's usually abbreviated with the Roman numeral LXX, which is the Roman numeral for 70. Okay. So people who think Catholics added 7 books to the Old Testament canon believe that the Palestinian canon was the true canon, that everyone knew that was the true canon, and that it's wrong to assume that the Alexandrian canon is legit. But recent scholarship has proven this view false, because we now know that there were at least 5 canons at the time Jesus Christ walked the earth. One canon would have been the Samaritan canon. Now, the Samaritans were disassociated from mainstream Judaism, of course, but they had a canon that consisted of the first 5 books of the Old Testament, so the what we call the Torah or the Pentateuch. Then we have the Sadducees. We know that they had the Torah or the Pentateuch, but we don't know if they had anything else in their canon, because when Jesus is having a discourse with the Sadducees regarding the resurrection, he quotes from Exodus to make his case for the resurrection, which is kind of odd because there are more obvious passages that he could have used, such as from Daniel or Isaiah. So since he doesn't quote from Daniel or Isaiah to make the case for the resurrection while debating the Sadducees, it appears that maybe they didn't recognize those books as being canonical. That's the only reason why that would really make sense, and that's why scholars assume that they didn't recognize Daniel and Isaiah as being canonical. Another group would be the Essenes. They were separated from the temple, and they're the group that gives us the Dead Sea Scrolls. So they had more books in their canon. And it's debatable as to what they accepted as being canonical and what they didn't. We don't really know. Scholars just try to go by what has had commentaries written about it and what is referred to in other books. So then we have the Pharisees. Everybody's familiar with this group. Their canon, we know, of course, it consisted of the Pentateuch, and it consisted of other books as well, but we don't know which books exactly it consisted of. And then you have the Septuagint canon, and within the Septuagint canon, you have two traditions as well within that canon. We'll talk about that whenever we get to the difference between the Old Testament of the Catholic Church and the Old Testament of the Eastern Orthodox Church. So at the time Jesus Christ is walking the earth, there are 5 canons, at least 5 canons in circulation. But individuals who claim that there was a pure Palestinian canon make an appeal to 2 claims that cannot be historically proven. So they make an appeal to what's called a Great Assembly from the 5th century BC. And the claim is that I think it's 444 BC, something called a Great Assembly gathers, and they put together the canon, and that is the Palestinian canon. And this was claimed by Rabbinical Judaism in the 2nd century AD. Now, Rabbinical Judaism is what emerged from Pharisaic Judaism. So the Pharisees, they were, when Jerusalem fell in 70 AD, the Pharisees were the only group strong enough to survive that, but they had to modify things, and they evolved into what is known as Rabbinical Judaism today. So they reorganize, establish their canon, and to give it authority, they make an appeal to tradition or to it being ancient. But there's no historical evidence of this ancient assembly. So it could have been the case, may not have been the case. We don't know, but that's not good enough for us to actually say that, yeah, there was a Palestinian canon. No, that doesn't work. Another claim to support the idea of the pure Palestinian canon is the claim that in the temple, the priest had the text. So whatever was in the temple was part of the canon. If it wasn't in the temple, then it wasn't a part of the canon. The problem with this theory is, again, we don't have any evidence as to what was in the temple and what wasn't in the temple other than the Torah or the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. We know they were there, but other than that, we don't know. So it's pure speculation. So there's no historical grounding for this idea of a pure Palestinian canon. Which canon did the church use? The church used the Septuagint. The list that we have in 382, the council that was held in Rome in 382, gives us a list of the books of the Old Testament and the New Testament, and it is the same list that is declared infallibly to be the canon at the Council of Trent in the 16th century. Let me say that again. The same list of books that we were given in 382 in Rome is the same list that is infallibly declared to be the canon in the 16th century at the Council of Trent. So, it's obvious from the historical evidence that Rome was not adding books to the Old Testament canon. In fact, it was the reverse that happened. It was the Protestants who wanted to go with the tradition of the Jews, who had the Tanakh, the 24 books of the Tanakh, which is equivalent to the, like as I said before, the proto-canonical books. They wanted to go with that tradition, so they went outside of the church to follow a canon that was not a part of the church's canon. I mean, it is a part of the church's canon that it's those proto-canonical books are in the canon, but there's also the deuterocanonical books. So it's odd that they go outside of the church to establish a canon. Now, it should be noted that initially Protestants didn't remove the deuterocanonical books from the canon. Initially, they were printed in most Protestant Bibles, but they were put in a different section. And they were considered to be like good historical reading, maybe something to give you a little bit more insights into the actual proto-canonical books, but no doctrine was supposed to be established from those books. However, I believe it was in Scotland where they decided that it would be more beneficial for printing purposes to just do away with the deuterocanonical books. And so then you have these Bibles being printed that just contain the proto-canonical books. And that's how you end up with American evangelism or evangelical Americans with a Bible that it doesn't have anything other than the proto-canonical books. And then they start thinking that, well, the Catholics have 7 more books than I have in my Bible, so they must have added some books to the Bible. That's not what happened. Those books were removed by Protestants during the Protestant Reformation. And I say that removed as in later they eventually became removed, right? The initial Protestants kept them there, but they just put them in a different section and held them in a different view than the view that the church held them in. And it should be noted that those deuterocanonical books were debated, and you have someone can appeal to someone like St. Jerome, who seems to have thought that only the proto-canonical books should be accepted, but that's an opinion of Jerome. That's, he gave us the Vulgate, which was the Latin translation used by the church for centuries. So, but the opinion of a church father is not an infallible teaching. Another point I would like to make regarding the Old Testament canon, it's not just the Catholic Church that has more than 39 books in her Old Testament canon. The Eastern Orthodox have 49 books. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which is a part of the Oriental Orthodox tradition, has 54 books in her canon. Just think about that. The Eastern Orthodox, the Catholic Church, and the Oriental Orthodox Church are all apostolic churches, meaning these are churches that have bishops who succeed or go all the way back to, they have a lineage going all the way back to the apostles. So all 3 of these ancient churches have Old Testament canons larger than the Protestant Old Testament canon, which, as we all know, is a child of the 16th century. That's something to think about. If the Catholic Church added books, which, as I think I've shown, she did not, well, when did these other churches add the books? It should be noted that in the East, this idea of the canon is a little bit looser than it is in the West. So if I'm not mistaken, I think their canons are still open. But they do have a kind of a set list of books. Whenever they print their Bibles, they have, those books included. But if I'm not mistaken, I don't think they've declared, this is the canon that's closed. I think they still have it open. Whereas in the West, Protestants say, no, the 39 books, that's it. And of course, in the Catholic Church, at the Council of Trent, we declared the canon, and it's infallibly declared, and it's closed. So I hope that I have answered the question as to whether or not the Catholic Church added 7 books to the Old Testament canon. That is an emphatic no. It's not historically true. And not only that, but if you just use logic and reason, it's not true, because she's not the only one with more books in her canon. So all the apostolic churches have larger canons than the Protestant churches. So Anyway, I hope that I've spoken this in love and that it's been received well, and that people understand the how this different point of view came about regarding the canon amongst Protestants. If you like the content, please hit the like and subscribe. And until next time, God bless.